So yesterday I had one of the best lessons I've had in a long time with one of my more advanced students, and he really wants to understand like the main concepts of music theory. Um, he doesn't really want to be like a jazz player because we talked about like, do you really want to get into like jazz music? Because I'm not a jazz player, so I mean, super advanced theory that is relevant to jazz is kind of in another sphere of knowledge. But since I don't play jazz, it's kind of like I've tried to learn jazz theory and I get it, but I don't use it. So we started talking about like what are the concepts that are really useful for more like pop and rock to understand. And one of them that came up was the how do you change keys? Like let's say I'm playing the key of C major. And I want to get to the key of G major. Like I could just switch, because a lot of songs switch between keys, so I could just switch. Like I'm playing chords in the key of C. I could just switch to the key of G. And I'll switch back to the key of C. It's a little clunky though. I'll try to make it sound as good as I can with just straight up switching and not doing the trick I'm going to show, and I kind of explained to him. So we try to do it a little sneakier way, but not doing the trick that I'm going to show. I'm not sure if that sounds weird. It sounds a little goofy to me, but it's kind of working. And so I was using here. I'll point out when I change keys. I'm in the key of C. Still in the key of C. Right here, I switch to the key of G. Back to the key of C right there. So key of C. Key of G. That's right. And then back to the key of C right here. So the reason why that kind of worked, I was a little sneaky about it, because E minor is a nice chord to kind of segue to the key of G, but it's still a little bit clunky. So what people do more often when they want to change keys is they do a simple trick. They do the 5 chord of the key that they're trying to switch to. So if you don't know music theory, like this is the kind of stuff that if you hear about this concept, it kind of can help to make you think like, well, what does that mean? So it could be sometimes like when you hear these kind of questions, it kind of like opens up music theory. So 5 chord of the key changing into, that you're changing to. So what you do is you play the 5 chord. I didn't do that right now, I'm going to demonstrate it. You play the 5 chord, so the Roman numeral 5 means the 5 chord of the key that you're changing to. So not of the key that you're in, but the key that you're changing to. So real quick, I'll draw out the chords in the key of C major and then G major, so you can see what I'm talking about, because this is a little bit hard to grasp if you've never heard this. So the chords in the key of C major are C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, and B diminished. And I'm actually going to make the 5 chord into a 7 chord, a dominant 7, because this is a common way to do it. And a lot of times people play, the 5 chord is the one chord that becomes a dominant 7 chord. And I'm going to put a red box around that, just because it'll make it a little bit easier to actually, I mean, that most people, that what they do is they play a dominant 7 there when they want to switch keys. So then the chords in the key of G are G, A minor, B minor, C, D, but I'm going to do D7 because that's the 5 chord, E minor, F sharp diminished. And I'll write the Roman numerals up real quick above them. Should have written this down before I started recording this, but it's okay. So there's 7 chords in each key. So take a look at this picture real quick. So notice what I did. I wrote the key of C major, and on top, and you can see there's C, D minor, E minor, F, G7, so we can make the 5 chord into a dominant 7. A minor is the 6 chord, B diminished. And then G, A minor, B minor, C, D7, E minor, F sharp diminished. So those are the 7 chords in the key of C major on top and G major on bottom. So to go back to this rule though, to change to a key, you want to play the 5 chord of the key that you're changing to. So you can set up the change like so that the listener's ear will be like prepared for the key change. So I mean the physics of why this works, I mean there are books about that. Our ears just like certain things. But this is just the music theory rule. So let's see how that would work. So let's say I'm in the key of C major. Well, what I need to do to switch to the key of G more smoothly is play a D7 chord. So let's say I'm playing the chords C, A minor, F, G, and I'll do that twice. Let's say that was my chord progression. So times 2, and then I'm going to play D7, and then I'm going to start playing in the key of G. I'll play G, E minor, C, and D. And I'll keep doing that. So then I'll just stay in the key of G. So if you want to look at how, like, a little picture of that, so I'm going to play C, A minor, F, G. That first chord progression would be in the key of C major. Then I'm going to play a D7 chord because that's the 5 chord. That's the 5 chord of the key I'm going to, which is G major. So I'm going to throw that in right here. This is my transition. And then I'm going to go to play this chord progression, which is from the key of G. So this little piece right here is using the concept, the 5 chord of the key that I'm going to, which is G. So I'm starting in C, and I'm going to G. So C, A minor, F, G. I'm going to do that twice, so you get a feeling like we're in the key of C. Because if I only do it once, it won't be as noticeable. Then I'm going to strum a D7. Then I'm just going to start playing in the key of G, G, E minor, C, D. So let me do that so you can hear how it sounds, and then I'll do it without the transition chord, and you can hear what it would sound like. So that's 1, C, A minor, F, G, see how kind of smooth that was? Like your ear somehow adding that 5 chord makes it much less clunky. So in jazz music, people do this all the time. They'll set up the key change with the 5 of the key they're going to. But it's also cool for pop music. It's just a good trick. You don't have to do it. People change keys all the time in sort of weird ways and break all sorts of rules. Like MGMT is a good modern example of that, and I like learning their songs because their chord progressions aren't in a single key and they're kind of mixing chords from different keys, so that's another thing you can do, but this is a good rule for just a straight up change from one key to the next. So one more time, take a look at that picture. I'm going to play it one more time, and then I'll play it without the D7, and you can hear the difference. So one more time with the D7. Let's do it with bar chords instead. So I'm going to do C, A minor, F, F, G, and then D7, G, E minor, C, D, I actually didn't like that. I thought that actually sounded worse than doing the open chords. Sometimes it just has to do with the voicings of the chords. I thought this was a little more subtle sounding, so I could think about why that was, but it was a little clunkier doing the D7 here. Still sounded good, but I thought this sounded a little subtler. So now I'm going to do it without that D7. So I'm going to cut that D7 out right there. So I'm not going to play D7 and listen to what it would sound like. So C, A minor, F, G, I do it again, C, A minor, F, G, E minor, C, and then back to C. So I'm not sure if you can tell that sounds clunkier. It's kind of one of those things you gotta try it and try playing over stuff like this and start to notice it, because it's done a lot. I mean, it's not done that much in pop music. Pop music tends to only have like really simple chord progressions, but if you start getting into a little bit of jazz music, you'll see it a ton, and you will notice it in some pop music. But a lot of the bands who do it in pop music, they tend to have less, like I said, with MGMT or the Beatles, bands that do more interesting chord progressions than a lot of bands, like, will kind of mix stuff together. So like the way that that could work, for example, would be instead of having a transition right there, what you could do instead, like a band like the Beatles or MGMT, what they might do is actually throw like a D major chord in that first chord progression, and then maybe like an F chord in the last progression. So the two keys are kind of mixed together. So like we could try it. I don't know if this will sound good, but let's say I got rid of the F in the first chord progression and did a D there, and then I got rid of the E minor in the second progression and put an F. So see what I did? I kind of mixed the keys, like D major, this chord over here. D major is not in the key of C. D minor is actually in the key of C, which is much different than D major. So adding that in is mixing a chord from the key of G into the key of C. So we're not really in the key of C here, we're kind of in between keys. Then I'll do a D7. Then over here, F. If you look here, there's no F, an F major chord in the key of G. So over here I threw a chord in from the key of C. So this might sound horrible, but we'll see. But this is more like what I see people doing. And a lot of times it's because people aren't thinking. They're just like, this sounds cool, and just playing. And that's how I make up stuff. But in terms of analyzing it and kind of knowing what to do with that, how to solo over it, how to steal like other people's ideas, it's important to kind of grasp these kinds of things. So C, A minor, D, G, C, A minor, D, D7, G, F, C, D. It's sounding pretty cool. It's kind of working for me. The one thing I might do here is get rid of the A minor. I don't like that for some reason, and put an F there. So I'm going to try that. I have a feeling that will sound cooler. So now it's like the F also is really tying this down more to the key of C. Because without that F, keeping A minor, this chord progression as it was, C, A minor, D, G, really could be in the key of G. C, A minor, D or D7, and G. So this first chord progression, without this F, would really not be between keys. It could totally be in the key of G. So that's partly why I did it, but also I just didn't like how A minor sounded, so I'm going to try this chord progression now. C, F, D, G, D7, G, F, C, D. And now both chord progressions are in between keys. D7, I'll just leave it in there as sort of a transition between the two. That actually sounds really good. So like I'm happy with that chord progression. So then the question would be, how would you solo over this? Like, what scale would you use to solo over this? So like, what I usually do is just start with a pentatonic scale because it's easy. Like this, I would guess would work. This basic G minor pentatonic if I want it kind of bluesy. I'm hearing that would probably work. It would start to sound bluesy, or I would try G major pentatonic. So let's see if that would work. Not really. That one, just by noodling around while I was playing, wouldn't really work. So what about C major pentatonic? That would sound really good. So C major pentatonic would work over this whole thing. So that's what I would start with. The other strategy I use when I'm soloing over something like that is to not really think in terms of a scale, but to think in terms of what chords are being played. So like while a C chord's being played, you could play like C chord. Then it switches to F. Then we need a D. Then G. Just off the top of my head, I did not like how that D sounded though, so like when I would be playing along, I'd be like, I don't really want to get into that D chord, so I would probably play something else. But I actually like, just from my first intuition, I think C major pentatonic would sound good. So I'd probably start with that, and then if I ran into a spot where I really didn't like how it sounded, I would jump into like that more chord way of thinking. Like let's say I was playing C major pentatonic. I wish I had a looper pedal right now, but so imagine that's going on. I'll play C major pentatonic. That actually sounds really good hearing. But let's say I got to the F chord, I didn't like how it sounded. I might play an F little chord. So it could be D. I don't like how that F sounds. I like how the D sounds here, strangely enough. That would sound pretty cool. So what I just did was, actually that's weird because I didn't like how this D sounded. Maybe it's that I didn't like. Whereas this is, that was just too bright maybe. So here would be the C chord be playing, F chord, D, G. So right here, this note is not in the scale. But I would just be playing it, because here's a little D chord. And there's a G. But also, I mean, the truth is, when most people are playing, they're not really thinking too hard. It's kind of like you gotta just let your subconscious go, so you just be like playing. And you might try a note. And you might add some notes to the scale just because you feel like it. So anyways, that was kind of like the stuff we were talking about, and he's just like at this stage where all that sort of stuff is making sense, like on a practical level, which is exciting because like the way it works usually is like first you hear about these concepts and they seem super impractical, and you don't really know like what's the point of that, or that seems hard. And then if you kind of have them in the back of your mind, like eventually you've seen enough songs and you kind of start to want to be able to write your own stuff or be able to solo over or whatever you come across. And the more you do it, it just starts to kind of become like a practical thing, which is weird. Whereas like I was saying, for me with the jazz theory, it's like being able to switch between the 2-5-1 progression between multiple keys and be able to solo over that. Like that's what jazz is, a lot of it's about. Or like understanding which mode would fit over which chords and why, and sort of what mood I would get. Like, I'd like to be able to know how to do that, and I understand the concept of it, but because I don't play jazz all the time, I don't really listen to jazz. It's kind of like not a practical skill for me, even though I've practiced lots of exercises and stuff. It's kind of like you just got to learn, like if you're into blues, you got to learn some blues theory and do that, or metal, learn a little bit of metal, sort of like what scales work where, and then that will become practical. But in terms of like analyzing and coming up with some more complex chord progressions, like this idea that I was talking about with the 5 chord of the key you're going to, and then what I was saying about how would you solo over that, like that's super practical to me, and that would fall within the range of like how do you do something with an MGMT song or Beatles song, which is kind of like a lot of that Beatles, like they got their progressions from jazz. Actually, from what I've heard, like they would listen to jazz songs and kind of take different things that they liked and a lot of different types of music. So that's probably why their music was so varied and interesting, rather than just like using a pop formula. But like, let's say I'm playing over their music, like a lot of times it's not clear what scale you would use. So you kind of like gotta think, well, this scale would pretty much work. But then when you get to some weird chords, you gotta switch into like, all right, I know the C major pentatonic's not gonna work over that A flat major chord they just threw in there out of nowhere. So over that A flat major, I'm just gonna think about an A flat major triad and just do something with that real briefly. Or just like just keep strumming the chords and play over it, so you just kind of find stuff that works and you don't necessarily know why. So anyways, yeah, this was a really good question that we got into talking about yesterday, so I figured I would share that. Okay, bye.